one juggling routine. So I may be reading from my cards and I may blither and babble a little bit, but we'll try to get you through the cemetery as good as we can and make it interesting for you. I heard Cindy Fowler say, whoever thought that the early pioneers would have thought that people would come to see their sites? Is that what you... True. You know, you drive by the cemetery and you look out there, it's so beautiful. There's beautiful monuments, but who's in here and where are they? And I think it's important for us with a history to find that place where our ancestors, whether they're related or not, are. One of the first settlers in Huron didn't stay long, was Helm. He was mentioned earlier by, I think Larry mentioned him in one of his slides. William Helm came here from Virginia, and he actually settled in the resort area. Those of you who know Jim Thomas, he settled at the Jim Thomas farm. Helm brought with him, along with his family, about 70 slaves. Austin Stewart was one of those slaves who later escaped slavery. He wrote a book about his harrowing adventures as a slave, and through his trials of working for abolition in Rochester and Canandaigua and in Canada, he wrote a book titled 20 Years a Slave, 40 Years a Free Man that has become popular, and he was recently celebrated for his 150th death birthday in Canandaigua, where he's buried. And at some point along the way, I'm going to start with this, we're hoping to be able to get a historic marker for Austin Stewart at the Thomas farm. So that would be nice to honor him there. A couple people mentioned Wolcott. Old Wolcott consisted of Wolcott, Butler, Rose, and Huron. And so some of the settlers in here are partly Wolcott, partly Huron. And some of the settlers who came here are buried in the Wolcott Cemetery at the, Glenside. So I may make mention of that, I may slip by it. So Wolcott was settled March 24th in 1807. It separated from Junius of Seneca County. And then April of 1810, Wolcott became a legal organization. In 1826, Butler, Rose, and Huron said bye-bye Wolcott, and they created their own townships. Huron was at that time called Port Bay, and the name Port Bay became confusing because Port Bay was partly in Wolcott, partly in Huron, so they decided to rename Port Bay Huron in 1834. Most of the people that we're going to talk about today came here between 1807 and 1810. There are a few outliers that we're going to talk about who came at different periods of time, but we consider them early settlers. And most of them came here from the New Marlborough, Massachusetts area, some from Connecticut, and a few from other parts of New York State. This cemetery was started in, I believe, and Lois, you can correct me, where's Lois?
1814.
That's what I was going to say. Bingo. And the first internment was a gal named Catherine Alexander. So if you want to keep that name in your mind, and if you see her stone anywhere, point it out, because I haven't found it yet. I haven't been actively searching for her, but Catherine Alexander was buried here in 1815. There are some stones. What you're looking at across the road is the old section of the cemetery, and there are some stones further down that are prior to 1815. Those would have been from grave sites that were at family farms, pardon me, that were moved here later after the cemetery started. So a little bit about this chapel. Asa Hell, I think that's his name. Yeah, Asa Hell, A-S-A-H-E-L. Dowd served in the Civil War. He moved here in about 1860, and there are a lot of Dowds over there that you're going to see. His great-granddaughter, Eleanor Dowd, was a retired school teacher. From what school, I don't know. That I've got to research a little bit more. But she was a retired school teacher who retired to Coral Gables, Florida. And she passed away when she was 88, which would have been 1948. And that's when she donated this. She gave this as a gift to the Huron Evergreen Cemetery. So that's where the Dowd Memorial Chapel comes from. I think it's kind of it's a really pretty building. And at some point, I'd love to see these windows redone so that they can be seen better than through the yellow plastic that's going on. It's used now for a storage shed. The caretaker keeps stuff in there that he needs to use to keep the cemetery cleaned up.
But bodies were stored there too.
Bodies, yes, absolutely, yes. Bodies were stored there
when they were buried in the winter.
Yes, yep. So we're going to go over. Sue Bacon is my deputy historian, and we picked for one of the outliers Beulah Ferrell to share with you. Beulah was a historian for the town of Huron for many years. She wrote a lot about the history. A lot of what I found out about some of these people is from Beulah's writing. So Sue, should we take people over to Beulah's
let's go see Beulah. Let's go meet Beulah. Beulah was born in the town of Huron on Morel Road on her family farm, and she was born in 7/20/1902. Her maiden name was Lefevre, and she grew up, lived all her life until she married her husband Ralph Ferrell, who lived I think only about 3 doors down, or that's where they lived after they married. She married Ralph Ferrell in 1924. Beulah, after graduating from high school, Beulah taught at a one-room country schoolhouse for a little while. Then she went to Rochester and got her registered nursing degree. She was active locally in Huron and actually in Wayne County, I think, in politics, which she enjoyed very, very much. Her husband was the town supervisor of Huron, and she had some part in the development of the New York State Food Surplus Program, and she ran a fruit farm with her husband, Ralph. In 1994, she presented to the town of Huron a set of her memoirs entitled When I Was Young, and I've had a chance to read these, and they're very delightful. If you ever get a chance, very delightful. For reading them, I think that had I lived at the same time she would have been a friend of mine. She's someone I would like very much.
She was a free spirit.
I think she was. I think she was from the writing. I can tell she was a free spirit. Maybe a little bit before her time or something.
She talked in those her memoirs about sex education in the
She
school,
did,
that it
yes.
wasn't adequate, I think. There's something to that.
And she also talks a lot about growing up on the family farm, about growing apples and black cat berries. She describes the cellar containing shelves and shelves of canned peas, green beans, beets, tomatoes, corn, peaches, pears, prunes, grape juice, and berries, 4 kinds of berries. The family also put away pickles, jams, jellies, cabbage, turnips, carrots, and apples. At one point she said, anyone who did not have this array of cans put aside for the winter was considered shiftless. She wrote of neighbors helping neighbors. Sometimes that included sharing the equipment needed to harvest the crops, but that didn't just mean that you sat by and waited for your turn to harvest the crop. It meant that when one farm had the equipment, all the other farms went and helped with the processing on that farm. And then the equipment moved to another farm and everybody would help. So everybody was helping everybody back then. Very good way to do it. And this included the children. She describes when she was younger, as much as she was able, there were things that she did in helping with the harvesting and then processing all the crops. She talked about how a seamstress would visit the house every summer and make the clothes for the children for their next year, although her parents sometimes ordered from the new Sears catalog, which was out and cost $1. She talked about some of the local families would produce their own fibers or things, and there was a weaver who lived on Loomisville Road named William Thomas. So I think I may have to look him up and see what I can find out about him. She also talked about how she believed the meals made from the food that they grew and harvested were better than anything in the stores, and she commented cholesterol had not yet been invented. Beulah lived to be the age of 100, and she passed on September 7th of 2002.
Thank you, Sue. Well done. Now we're going to cross over to the east side, and Lois Waffler is going to share with us about Reverend William Clark. Do you want to lead the way, Lois?
Okay.
I don't want you getting wet.
This is the gravesite of Reverend William Clark and his wife, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Sophronia? Is that
SPH. Anyway, that's close enough.
Sophronia?
On this
Sophronia?
side, it also says Harriet and Little Johnny. So I think they were small children. This person is an important pioneer in our area because he was the first Presbyterian pastor, called pastor. And he was born in Connecticut in 1777. At 19, he left home and he was a school teacher for 5 years, did a little farming, and then he was licensed by the Congregationalists to be a pastor. And he found a church on the east side of Lake Cayuga Lake, and he was boarding at John Tillison's family, and he fell in love with the oldest daughter, and they got married. But he's serving the church, but something bad happened. One of the ladies in the congregation said, "He promised me that he would marry me." Uh-oh. The powers that be in the church looked at it, and it wasn't so. But the damage had been done, and he was dismissed. He went across the lake to the west side and served at Hector and Lodi, Presbyterian church now. Back in those days, you could float between Congregationalists and Presbyterian. There wasn't that much difference. So he's there doing well, but he leaves because they quit paying him.
That's a good reason.
So he comes up to this area because his wife's sister, Betsy, was married to Garner Mudge Creek, and there were two brothers, Jarvis Mudge and
William.
He bought apparently 12.5 acres from them. Well, that's pretty small. Later on, he buys a whole bunch of land, little parcels here and there. These are all parcels that I was able to find. But his main thing is being a pastor. So he's here and he's hired because Garner Mudge was an elder, so I think he had a pull. Don't know. Anyway, so he was hired here in 1816. This church, the Huron Presbyterian Church, was started in 1813. So he's here 3 years. Things are going good. There's there are new members, and then another bad thing happened. A pastor in the area who did not have a church decided to move in on him and got acquainted and made friends with some of the people in the church. And at that time, of course, there was no worship house. They would meet in the schoolhouse, and they would meet in the alternate between the schoolhouse in Woka and the schoolhouse here. The first schoolhouse, according to John Wadsworth's book, is up the corner, and some of you near the road can see there's a bump, and apparently, according to John Wadsworth, that was called, now I'm losing it, Cobble Knoll. And so they would be meeting there. Well, this other pastor would show up ahead of time and lead the worship. It was so bad that the presbytery put that guy on trial and forced him out of the ministry. Reverend Clark stayed here in there was a little bit of friction because there was a section in the congregation apparently that still liked the other guy and liked him, although the other guy had been telling lies about him all along. So not once but twice he had people that lied about him and caused him problems. Okay, so he is living here, and he's buying extra land, and then another thing happened. The people here wanted to build a church, but they didn't have enough money. First thing you know, they didn't have enough money to pay him, so they cut his wages by a third. And then the following year, they said, now you've got to go preach 19 times in this area, Huron, 9 times in Woket, 4 times down south at Stewart's Corner, wherever that might be, and then at the Blockhouse Road, which I think is Clyde, 2 times. Think about that. That meant the people living here would have church on an average of 1 in 3 weeks. So they remained here for a while, but then because of the less salary he was getting, he finally decided to quit. But he still lives in the area for a while, and then he starts some little churches in different areas. He supplies other churches, and then finally he gets a big pastorate down in Danby, which is south of Ithaca. And when he was there, apparently he decided to sell some of his land, and he sold 186 acres to Philip Sowers, which Rosa is going to show you here in the cemetery. And he was quite an astute businessman. When I figured up, he gained 176% gain. Not bad. His children were quite illustrious. They were really quite great. One was a lawyer and a senator for the state. Another one was a judge. Another one was a general. 2 sons wound up in Michigan. One daughter married a doctor, and the other one married Solomon Upson, who is the son of Josiah Upson, who is a famous pioneer here. And so he leaves in 1823, and 4 years later, the presbytery divides the congregation into 2, and 33 people were members in the Huron area. So they eventually built the church, and they are the current Huron Presbyterian. 10 of the group went to Woket with another person, and they formed the First Presbyterian Church of Woket. Now, there's one little catch. Way back when they started, they called themselves the First Presbyterian Church of Woket. But there was a Woket, the ones that was the 4, Rose, Butler, Woket, and it was the big one. And then they changed their name when this area pulled away from the big township, and it was called
Port Bay. Presbyterian Church
for a couple of years. And then they changed their name
Presbyterian Church of Huron.
to Huron. But the Woket people took the First Presbyterian Church of Woket, but that was the name that had been used for the bigger one.
So when did it switch to Huron Presbyterian Church?
Because
it was
when
Presbyterian
the
Church.
township changed their name.
But in the records it says it was the Presbyterian Church of Huron, and now it's Huron Presbyterian Church.
Oh, that's semantics.
No, it's not.
Not for the story.
I do have some printed material, because at one time our pastor was on a sabbatical and said, you people in your church can do a sermon. So I did a sermon on Reverend William Clark. So as you're walking along, you can grab one. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Lois. Thank you.